"I think we just found a Martian turd," said Captain Varric, squinting down at the rust-red lump in the dusty cavern. It was the size of a small dog and smelled like a chemical spill mixed with despair. "Congratulations, Captain," replied Della, the team's ever-optimistic tech specialist, with a degree in sarcasm. "Finally found something with worse hygiene than you." Varric kicked the lump, which clanged, hollow and metallic. "Relax, it's not a turd. Probably just old Martian tech, or a very dead robot hamster." The underground facility stretched out around them, a maze of corridors like a giant had played connect the dots with steel beams and forgotten to finish. It was dim and damp, with an ambience that screamed abandoned for a reason. The team's flashlights flickered over walls covered in strange symbols. Symbols that looked a lot older than humanity's first step on Mars. Tucker, the team's muscle and part-time pessimist, grunted as he poked at the lumps of debris. "This place gives me the creeps. Like we're not alone." "Well, we've got each other," Varric said, his grin barely visible under layers of Martian dust. "Doesn't that make you feel warm and fuzzy, warmer than your last girlfriend, I bet?" Della chimed in, her fingers working over a console that looked like it had seen better millennia. "This tech, it's not Martian, but it's not ours either. Hybrid, maybe, or someone's really bad DIY project. Hopefully not IKEA," Tucker muttered, stepping over what could have been a Martian bed frame. "Otherwise, we're screwed." The air was thin and metallic, making it feel like they were breathing in the ghost of a scrapyard. But Varric loved it. The mystery, the tension, and the possibility of finding something to screw up the universe's day. "Keep moving," Varric ordered, his voice echoing. "I don't want to be here when the ghosts come back from their lunch break." As they pressed deeper into the facility, the walls seemed to close in on them, narrowing like the throat of a beast about to swallow them whole. The ceiling dripped with condensation that tickled the back of Varric's neck like the fingers of a creepy uncle at a family reunion. "Looks like we've stumbled onto the Martian version of a basement," Della said, wiping her brow. "All it's missing is the creepy clown and an old rocking chair." "Let's hope the clown stayed on Earth," Tucker replied, glancing nervously at a shadow that seemed to move on its own. They rounded a corner to find a massive door. Ancient symbols carved into its surface glowed faintly, pulsating like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant. Della ran her hands over the carvings, eyes wide with childlike curiosity masked by adult cynicism. "Let's open it," she said, already pulling wires from her backpack. "What's the worst that could happen?" Famous last words, Della, Varric responded, taking a step back. "If something jumps out, I'm hiding behind you." With a series of sparks and some enthusiastic swearing, the door groaned open, revealing a cavernous chamber. It was filled with shadows deeper than a politician's pocket, and in the center stood a pedestal with a console that seemed to demand attention. "Ah, a control panel," Della exclaimed, moving forward with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for kids on Christmas morning. "Let's see what secrets you're hiding, you magnificent bastard." As she tinkered, Varric noticed something glimmer in the shadows. "Hey Tucker, shine a light over there. I think I see something," Tucker obliged, revealing rows of stasis pods lining the walls. "Human stasis pods." "Well, shit," Varric said, scratching his head. "Looks like we found ourselves a hidden colony, or a really creepy collection of human souvenirs. Bet they're not here for the scenery," Tucker remarked, his voice a mix of awe and horror. Della turned from the console, her face lit with the glow of discovery. "I think this place was a fallback plan. A secret colony, set up when Earth went to hell in a handbasket. So, they're the lucky ones who got to sleep through the end of the world?" Varric asked, trying to wrap his head around the enormity of it. "Or they're the unlucky ones," Tucker said, peering into a pod. "Depending on what they wake up to. Let's just hope they don't wake up cranky," Della joked, though her smile was strained. Unbeknownst to them, a pair of alien eyes watched from the shadowy recesses of the chamber, unblinking and cold. The observers had been here long before humanity's first footsteps on Mars, and they'd seen enough of human nature to know that things were about to get interesting. "All right, enough sightseeing," Varric said, clapping his hands. "Let's find out if we can get these folks back up and running. After all, nothing says welcome back like a few thousand-year-old hangovers." Della typed furiously at the console, her fingers a blur. "Give me a minute. This system is older than my grandmother's jokes. Let's hope it's got better punchlines," Tucker said, his hand resting on his sidearm. Varric paced around the chamber, his mind racing with possibilities. They'd stumbled upon something big, bigger than anything he'd ever imagined. And while the thrill of discovery was intoxicating, a part of him couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just opened a Pandora's box. "Whatever happens, we stick together," Varric said, looking at his team with the kind of seriousness he reserved for truly dire situations. "Like running out of coffee. Together until the end," Cap, Della replied, her voice tinged with a rare note of warmth. "Even if the end involves getting our asses kicked by Martian ghosts." As they worked, the alien observers continued to watch, their motivations as alien as their biology. For them, humans were a curiosity, a species capable of great destruction and greater potential. And in this hidden facility they saw both the darkness and the light of humanity's legacy. Varric looked at the stasis pods, wondering about the stories they held. The lives suspended in time, waiting for a future that may or may not have come. "All right," Della said, stepping back from the console. "I've got the systems online." "It's your call, Captain," Varric nodded, taking a deep breath. "Let's wake him up." With the press of a button, the room hummed to life. Lights flickered on, casting eerie shadows across the walls as the stasis pods began their awakening sequence. Gases hissed and machinery whirred, stirring the sleeping occupants from their long slumber. Tucker watched with wide eyes, a mixture of awe and trepidation. "Here goes nothing." Slowly, the first pod opened, releasing a cloud of vapor that shimmered in the dim light. Varric squinted, trying to make out the form within. "Welcome to the future," he said, more to himself than the awakening human. "Hope you're ready for it." As the figure inside stirred, Varric felt a chill creep up his spine, the kind that only came when something momentous was about to happen. The alien observers watched silently, their eyes reflecting the glow of the awakening chamber. They knew this was only the beginning, that humanity's reawakening on Mars would have repercussions that echoed across the stars. "Here comes the fun part," Della whispered, her voice a mix of excitement and dread. Varric nodded, gripping his weapon tightly. "Let's make sure we're ready for whatever comes next." The first human from the stasis pod blinked, eyes adjusting to the dim light, and the room fell silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on them all. Varric took a step forward, extending a hand. "Captain Varric of the good ship We're Probably Screwed. Welcome back to the world of the living." The newly awakened human looked at him, confusion giving way to a slow, dawning realization. "What year is it?" "Far enough in the future that your wardrobe's back in style," Varric replied with a smirk. As the others in the pods began to stir, Varric glanced at his team, then back at the growing crowd. They'd set something in motion here, something big. "Buckle up," Varric said, the thrill of adventure coursing through him. "This ride's about to get bumpy." And from the shadows the alien observers silently agreed. The ride had just begun. "Welcome to the future," Varric repeated, just in case the ancient sleeper couldn't hear him over the sound of his own brain frying. The newly awakened human, who we'll call Greg for now because he looked like a Greg, simply blinked, as if trying to remember how to communicate with a species he was still part of. "Year," Greg repeated, his voice rusty as if he'd been gargling nails in his sleep. "It's 2287, Della chimed in, coming up behind Varric, or as we like to call it, Post-Apocalyptic Tuesday, where you can enjoy your choice of wasteland vistas or the charming ambience of a decaying space colony." Greg looked down at his bare feet, then back at the team. "I'm hungry," Tucker snorted. "Join the club. We meet every Tuesday. Snacks not provided." Varric scratched his head, wondering how to explain the last few centuries to a man who probably thought the height of technology was a flip phone. Before he could start, however, the room was flooded with a sudden, cold blue light. The kind of light that screamed spooky alien shit rather than welcome home, humanity. That's new, Della said, shading her eyes. Not part of the original welcome package. Varric turned, trying to find the source, when three figures stepped from the shadows. They were tall, their skin a shade of blue that suggested they'd been bathing in glacier runoff, and their eyes were a little too big for comfort, like they'd been designed by a committee that had never actually seen humans. "All right, who ordered the extraterrestrials?" Varric muttered, hand inching toward his weapon, just in case. The tallest of the newcomers stepped forward, folding her arms across her chest in what seemed like a universal gesture of annoyance. "I am Lura of the Vishal," she said, her voice smooth as butter and twice as oily. "We've been expecting you, expecting us." Varric echoed, giving Tucker a sidelong glance. "Did we RSVP to an alien party and forget?" Lura's lips curled into a smile, sharp and humorless. "We are the custodians of this facility. It was constructed to preserve your kind, humans, against the tide of destruction you seem so fond of riding. Preservation, huh?" Della said, frowning. "Does that come with dental?" Lura ignored this, her eyes scanning the room as if she were inspecting a particularly uninspiring art exhibit. "We have observed your species for centuries. Your capacity for self-destruction is matched only by your potential for greatness." "Yeah, we get that a lot," Tucker said, crossing his arms. "Mostly from people trying to sell us timeshares." Lura's gaze settled on Varric, unblinking. "We intend to relocate your kind to a sanctuary, a place where you can thrive without the complications of your current existence." Sanctuary. Varric repeated, skepticism dripping from the word. "And what's in it for you? There is no bargain." "We offer survival," Lura replied, her tone as implacable as her expression. "In exchange, we only ask that you learn from your past. Avoid the mistakes that brought your world to ruin." Varric rubbed his chin, considering this alien olive branch wrapped in a conundrum. "And if we say no?" Lura's smile widened, though it held no warmth. "Refusal is inadvisable. The alternative is annihilation. Your world has little time left." "Ah, the classic carrot and stick," Della said, with a side of existential dread. Greg, who had been watching this exchange with the glazed eyes of someone recently roused from a 1,000-year nap, finally spoke. "So, do we get a say in this?" Varric glanced at him. "Congratulations, Greg, you're awake just in time to decide the fate of humanity." "No pressure." The Vishal stood silently, their presence a weight that settled over the room like the promise of rain. Varric could feel the tension in his team, the uncertainty of weighing alien promises against the survival of their species. It was, he realized, one hell of a Monday. "Let's say we agree to this magical sanctuary of yours," Varric said, trying to keep his voice steady. "What then?" Lura nodded, acknowledging the question with something that might have been respect. "You are free to choose your destiny. We offer guidance, not governance. The path is yours to walk or to stumble from as you see fit. Guidance sounds suspiciously like a sales pitch," Tucker grumbled. Lura's gaze flicked to him, eyes colder than the void. "We have nothing to gain from your continued existence but the preservation of life in its most resilient form." "Yeah, well, we're pretty damn resilient," Della said, her voice edged with defiance. "But let's cut the crap. Why help us?" The alien paused, as if considering how much honesty was appropriate. "Our own kind once faced extinction. We survived by learning, adapting. We see in humanity a reflection of our past, a species teetering on the brink. Your destruction would be a waste." "Well, isn't that heartwarming?" Varric muttered. "We're like a cosmic after-school special." Della shot him a look. "So what now, Cap? Do we trust the Blue Brigade here, or do we keep digging for the pitfalls?" Varric exhaled heavily, the weight of leadership pressing down on him. He was a captain, used to commanding a ship, not deciding the fate of civilizations. Still, if he backed away from the challenge, he'd never forgive himself, or live it down in the team's endless teasing. "All right," Varric said, turning to face Lura, his decision made. "We'll hear you out. But you should know, we don't take kindly to being manipulated. Our people might be a mess, but they're our mess." Lura inclined her head, a gesture of acknowledgement. "You will have your chance to decide, but tread carefully. Time is not on your side." As the Vishal moved aside, revealing a corridor that led deeper into their facility, Varric felt a strange mix of dread and anticipation. It was the thrill of the unknown, the pull of a mystery that demanded unraveling. And if it led to humanity's salvation, or its final downfall, he intended to be at the forefront with sarcastic comments and all. "All right, team," he said, gesturing for them to follow. "Let's see where the rabbit hole leads. And maybe, just maybe, we'll find out what the hell we're supposed to do next." Della fell into step beside him, her face a mix of determination and cheeky humor. "So, Varric, think there's any chance this place serves drinks? If there's a bar, I'll let you pick the first round," Varric replied, rolling his eyes. "Just don't hold your breath for anything that comes with a cocktail umbrella." Tucker brought up the rear, ever the pessimist. "I don't know about you guys, but if we're going to another planet, I hope it's got better weather than this dump." As they stepped into the corridor, the walls hummed with an energy that promised answers, and possibly even more questions. Varric felt that familiar pull of adventure, even as the weight of responsibility pressed against his shoulders. But he was ready. Or as ready as he'd ever be, considering he'd just been voluntold into potentially saving the human race. "Keep your eyes open," Varric said, his voice laced with equal parts excitement and caution. "We've got a lot to learn, and if we're lucky, maybe we'll even find something worth fighting for." The team moved forward, their footsteps echoing down the corridor, leaving behind the stasis pods and the world they knew. Ahead lay the unknown, alien allies, sanctuary promises, and the daunting task of redefining humanity's future. It was a lot to take in, but they were ready to face it together. "After all," Varric muttered to himself, a faint smile tugging at his lips, "if we can survive a Martian basement, we can survive anything." And somewhere in the depths of the facility, the Vishal watched, their alien expressions unreadable, yet somehow hopeful. They knew the stakes, had seen the rise and fall of civilizations. But in this ragtag crew, they saw a spark, the kind of stubborn, irreverent resilience that might just defy the odds. "Let's go," Varric said, his voice firm as they ventured into the unknown. "Time to find out what kind of future we can carve out for ourselves." The corridor stretched out before them, a path laden with the promises and perils of a new beginning. With each step, they moved further from the past and closer to a future they'd have to fight for. A future that, if they were stubborn enough, might just include a chance for redemption. The corridor stretched on like a bad joke with no punchline, the walls whispering secrets in a language nobody cared to understand. Varric, his hand brushing against the cold metal for reassurance, led his ragtag group while contemplating the cosmic disaster their lives had become. Tucker, naturally, was the first to break the silence. "So what's the plan, Cap? Follow the Smurf Brigade until we're all singing Kumbaya in their sanctuary, or start a rebellion? Rebellion? Against what?" Della chimed in, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "We don't even know what these aliens want apart from playing babysitter." Greg, still looking like he'd been hit by a time-traveling bus, finally found his voice. "Maybe they just like watching us squirm. You know, like cosmic reality TV." "Great," Varric said, his tone laced with just enough cynicism to fuel a nuclear reactor. "We're the stars of Survivor, Galaxy Edition." As they continued walking, Varric's mind raced. He wasn't sure what was more terrifying, the idea of alien overlords dictating humanity's future, or the thought that they might actually need the help. But if there was one thing humanity was good at, it was resisting when told what to do, even if it meant shooting themselves in the foot just to prove a point. Ahead, the corridor split into two paths, the right one glowing with a soft, inviting light that screamed, "Come this way if you want to live." The left, darker and less reassuring, seemed to whisper, "Only the brave, or stupid, venture here. Welcome to the crossroads," Varric mused, looking down both paths. "Pick your poison." "Let's go left," Della suggested, already moving in that direction. "If they wanted us to take the right, they'd have put up a tourists this way sign." Tucker grinned, following her lead. "I'm all for being unpredictable. Plus, I hear the road less traveled has better snacks." Greg hesitated, his newly awakened brain still catching up. "Are we really going against the literal light?" Varric clapped him on the shoulder. "Don't worry, Greg. The worst that can happen is we die horribly. In the meantime, let's see where this rabbit hole takes us." With cautious steps, they ventured into the shadowed path, the air growing colder, the walls narrower. It seemed the Vishal hadn't anticipated their guests to be quite so resourceful, or contrary. "All right, team," Varric whispered, keeping his voice low as if the very walls had ears. "If we're going to dance to this tune, we need a plan. We can't just follow like sheep to slaughter." Della nodded, her expression one of grim determination. "So, we pretend to go along with it but keep an eye out for anything useful. Weaknesses, hidden exits, their version of a fire alarm, fake it till we make it," Tucker added, the grin never leaving his face. "We've done it before, right?" Varric nodded, even as his gut twisted with the weight of responsibility. "First rule of survival: never put all your creds in one basket. We agree to their terms for now, but keep our wits about us." The corridor opened into a wide room filled with what could generously be described as a command center. Screens lined the walls, each displaying images of Earth in varying stages of decay, cities crumbling, oceans rising, forests dwindling into deserts. It was like flipping through a disaster novel, except this was their reality. "Home sweet home," Greg muttered, his voice tinged with disbelief. Laura and her fellow Vishal awaited their arrival, each an immovable statue of blue skin and unreadable expressions. Laura gestured to the screens as if presenting a particularly dull PowerPoint. "This is what your world is becoming." "No shit," Tucker quipped. "I always knew Earth had a flair for dramatic exits." Varric stepped forward, affecting the sort of calm that only came with practice and a healthy dose of denial. "We'll consider your offer," he said carefully, "but we need to understand what you're really after." "What's the catch?" Laura's eyes flicked over him, a predator sizing up prey. "There is no catch, only survival. We merely wish to guide you to a future beyond ruin." "Guidance," Della repeated as if testing the word's taste. "Sounds like a fancy way of saying do as you're told." "Cooperation, then," Laura amended, her voice as smooth as ever. "The choice remains yours." Varric met her gaze, unflinching. "We'll play nice for now, but don't mistake that for compliance. Humans are funny that way. Tell us what to do, and we'll usually do the opposite." Laura inclined her head, acknowledging the defiance with what might have been amusement if aliens found anything amusing. "We have no desire to force your hand, Captain. Only to ensure your survival." "Survival's great and all," Tucker said, "but we kind of like doing it on our own terms." Greg, still adjusting to this brave new world, added, "So, while we're figuring out how not to die, any chance you've got a cafeteria around here?" Varric sighed, though he secretly appreciated the distraction. "We'll need time to discuss among ourselves." In private, Laura nodded, gesturing to a side door that led to what appeared to be a small meeting room. "Of course. Take all the time you need." Once inside, the door shut firmly behind them. Varric turned to his team. "All right, we've got our work cut out for us. We need to find out what makes these aliens tick. Maybe we offer them a taste of Earth cuisine," Tucker suggested, only half joking. "Nothing says thank you like a good old-fashioned human dinner." Bribery aside, Della said, "we need to map out this place, find anything we can use. Maybe there's ancient tech like the Martian stuff we found." Greg, finally feeling part of the team, nodded. "If we're going to resist, we can't just wing it." "No winging it," Varric agreed. "But let's not overthink this either. We're going to need every advantage we can get." They huddled close, their whispered conversations blending into a symphony of plans and counterplans. each member contributing to their makeshift resistance. They were few but resourceful, humanity's last, best hope wrapped up in a package of irreverence and stubbornness. As they strategized, Varric felt a flicker of hope, however small. The Vishal might see them as a problem to fix, but if there was one thing humanity excelled at, it was proving everyone else wrong. It wouldn't be easy, but then nothing worthwhile ever was. "Let's move," Varric said, breaking their huddle. "The sooner we get this done, the sooner we find out if we're really as clever as we think." They exited the room, armed with nothing but determination and a plan forged in desperation. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. Lura awaited them, her expression as inscrutable as ever. "Have you reached a decision?" Varric nodded, channeling the kind of optimism usually reserved for those about to do something incredibly stupid. "We'll follow your guidance for now. But know this, we're not just passengers on this journey. We're the pilots." Lura's lips curved into that almost smile. "Then let us proceed. Your sanctuary awaits." As they followed her down another corridor, Varric felt the weight of uncertainty pressing on his shoulders. But he knew his team was behind him, ready to face whatever came next with grit and more than a little gallows humor. In the depths of the Vishal facility, as humanity's ragtag representatives walked toward their uncertain future, one thing was clear: they would not go gently. They would fight, they would resist, and most importantly, they would survive, even if it killed them. "Let's see if we can pull off the impossible," Varric murmured to his team, the hint of a grin tugging at his lips. Tucker, ever the optimist, chuckled. "It's what we do best, right?" With that, they forged ahead, the path before them as uncertain as their place in the galaxy. But if they had any say, they'd ensure humanity's story was far from over. And maybe, just maybe, they'd find a way to turn this cosmic joke into something resembling a happy ending. The Vishal facility, with its maze of corridors and cryptic symbols, was fast becoming less of a curiosity and more of a headache. Varric felt the pressure mounting with each step they took. His team had signed up for interstellar exploration, not a starring role in an alien reality show, and now he was up to his neck in decisions that could end up as either legendary triumphs or spectacular messes. Somewhere, someone was probably laughing at their predicament, and that thought alone kept his spirits just a tad above despair. The Vishal, with their unnervingly serene demeanor, seemed entirely too confident about their ability to manage these scrappy humans. Lura, particularly, had that air of someone who'd already won a game nobody else realized they were playing. As Varric and his crew walked behind her, the sense of being herded became impossible to shake off, much like a bad hangover or a persistent rash. "I wonder what happens if we just refuse to play along," Della mused, her voice echoing softly in the empty corridor. "Think they'll just kick us out for non-compliance?" "Right into the vacuum of space, probably," Tucker replied, hands thrust into his pockets as if he were on a casual stroll rather than dodging intergalactic doom. "Or maybe they'll force us to watch their version of educational TV until we beg for mercy. Could be worse," Greg added with a smirk. "They might make us their ambassadors, diplomatic immunity in exchange for our sanity," Varric snorted. "I'd rather take my chances with an interstellar plague, thanks. At least then we'd know what we're dealing with." As they rounded a corner, the corridor opened up into a vast chamber filled with more of the Vishal tech, sleek, silver constructs that hummed with a low, menacing energy. Varric had seen enough sci-fi to know that when alien tech started humming, it usually spelled trouble. "You think this is where they keep their no humans allowed signs?" Della asked, fiddling with an old-fashioned data pad she'd managed to swipe from one of the Vishal consoles. "I mean, it's either that or their version of a gift shop." "Gift shop, huh?" Tucker said, joining her. "Do they have any? My parents went a galaxy far, far away, and all I got was this lousy t-shirt merch." Greg's eyes narrowed as he tried to make sense of their surroundings. "I've got a bad feeling about this," he muttered, channeling his inner pessimist. "Feels like we're about to walk into the latest episode of humanity's greatest blunders." We've been cast as the comic relief, Varric said dryly. Gotta keep the aliens entertained somehow. As they ventured further into the chamber, the walls seemed to close in slightly, a testament to either clever engineering or an imminent need to panic. Varric had always preferred the latter. It kept adrenaline levels high and decision-making sharp. The Vishal tech began to react to their presence, lights flickering and panels shifting in ways that seemed a little too sentient for comfort. "Looks like they're rolling out the welcome mat," Tucker remarked. "Or is this the self-destruct sequence?" Varric scanned the room, plotting their next move. "All right, we need to." The room suddenly vibrated with a low frequency, causing a mild headache that thrummed at the base of Varric's skull. It was like standing too close to a bass speaker at a particularly aggressive concert, only without the music to make it worthwhile. "Varric, you might want to see this," Della called, her fingers working frantically across the screen of her purloined data pad. "Looks like they've activated some kind of containment field." "Containment field?" Varric raised an eyebrow. "Are we supposed to be the dangerous ones?" "Either that or their version of pest control," Greg said. "Guess they're not fond of unauthorized guests." "Great," Varric sighed. "Now we're the rats in their maze. Let's find a way to short-circuit this party trick before they decide to fumigate." Tucker, ever the optimist, pointed to a panel that seemed more haphazardly assembled than the rest. "Bet you that's their weak spot. Aliens may have tech miles beyond ours, but even they can't escape the curse of shoddy construction." Della got to work, her fingers dancing across the controls with a deftness born of necessity and a healthy dose of defiance. "Let's see what happens when we push a few buttons." The hum intensified, and for a heart-stopping moment, Varric feared they'd triggered something catastrophic. But then the lights flickered, the energy field sputtered, and the tech around them fell eerily silent. "Well, that was anticlimactic," Greg said, his shoulders relaxing ever so slightly. "Don't jinx it," Varric warned, though he couldn't help but share in the momentary relief. "There's still plenty of time for things to go south." "Speaking of which," Della said, her focus never wavering from the data pad, "I think I've got a blueprint of this place. It's not complete, but it's better than stumbling around blind." "Good work," Varric praised, genuinely impressed. "Let's use this to our advantage. The Vishal might think they've got us cornered, but I'll be damned if we let them call all the shots." With their newfound map in hand, the team pressed on, skirting around rooms that were best left unexplored, and making their way toward what they hoped was an exit, or at least a safer vantage point. Varric could feel the tension in his crew, a mix of fear and determination that fueled their every step. "How much you want to bet they're watching us right now?" Tucker asked, his voice a blend of curiosity and challenge. "I'll take that bet," Greg replied, "but I'm not sure I want to know the odds." "Does it really matter?" Della said, her voice tinged with irony. "We're in a giant alien funhouse with no idea how deep the rabbit hole goes." "The odds are probably the least of our worries." As they reached yet another corridor junction, Varric paused, considering their options. "Okay, we can either take the path that leads to the ominous-looking door or the one that looks like it leads to a broom closet." "Broom closet sounds safer," Greg offered, though his tone suggested he knew better than to believe in safe bets. "True, but we're not exactly here for the cleaning supplies," Varric said. "Let's go for the ominous door. If we're going to survive this fiasco, we might as well do it with some flair." The door slid open with a hiss, revealing a room filled with more of the sprawling alien tech. At its center stood a structure that resembled a cross between a throne and an electric chair, less than inviting and equally mysterious. "Now there's a piece of furniture that says welcome home," Tucker quipped, eyeing it with a mixture of fascination and dread. "Or congratulations on a life poorly lived," Della added. As they approached, Varric noticed a series of controls embedded in the armrests. The setup screamed control panel for something potentially disastrous, and was probably the last thing any sane person would willingly interact with. "Looks like the Vishal left us a present," Varric observed. "Let's see if we can't turn it into a surprise of our own." Della, never one to back down from a challenge, began to analyze the controls, her mind working at a pace that left the rest of them feeling almost sluggish by comparison. "I think I can get this thing to interface with the rest of their systems," she said, fingers a blur of motion. "If we're lucky, it might give us some leverage. Or blow us to kingdom come," Greg muttered, but there was no real malice behind it. He knew as well as the rest of them that they had no choice but to gamble. Tucker leaned in, offering what little assistance he could. "Leverage is good. Maybe we can convince them to let us go in exchange for not shorting out their entire facility." Varric nodded, though he knew the likelihood of such a scenario was slim at best. Still, they had to try. If the Vishal truly believed they were superior, maybe they'd underestimate just how resourceful humans could be when backed into a corner. Minutes ticked by, the silence filled with the quiet whine of alien machines and the ever-present tension that hung over them like a guillotine. Finally, Della looked up, a triumphant glint in her eyes. "I think I've done it," she announced, a hint of pride in her voice. "We've got some control over their systems. It's not much, but it's a start." "Nice work," Varric said, allowing himself a small smile. It wasn't a victory, but it was a step in the right direction. "Now all we need is a plan," Tucker said, "preferably one that doesn't involve us ending up as space debris." Varric glanced at the monitor before them, the alien script now partially translated into something resembling a language they could understand. It was an opportunity, a chance to tip the scales back in their favor, if only for a moment. "All right, here's what we're going to do," Varric said, his voice steady and sure. "We're going to use this interface to create a distraction, something big enough to draw the Vishal's attention away from us. Then we make our move. And if it all goes to hell," Greg asked, ever the realist. "Then we improvise," Varric replied. "With any luck, we'll come out of this with more than just our skins." The plan was as precarious as they came, a fragile hope in a sea of uncertainty. But Varric had learned long ago that sometimes it was the desperate gambles that paid off the most. They'd faced impossible odds before and come out swinging. There was no reason this time should be any different. "Let's make some noise," Varric declared, his resolve firm. "If the Vishal want a show, we'll give them one they won't forget." With Della at the controls, the plan was set in motion. As signals flared and systems winked in and out of activity, Varric felt the familiar rush of anticipation mingling with dread. The stakes were higher than they'd ever been, but that only made the challenge more exhilarating. "Ready?" he asked, glancing at his team. "Ready," they chorused, their determination a testament to the human spirit that refused to be broken. In that moment, Varric knew that no matter what happened next, they would face it together. And together, they might just defy the odds stacked against them. The Vishal might have orchestrated this game, but they hadn't counted on their human players rewriting the rules. As Varric and his team prepared to act, one thing was clear: they were far from done. The future was uncertain, but if they had any say, it would be a future of their own making. The underground facility they'd been wandering through for what felt like a lifetime, though in reality it had only been a couple of hours, was starting to get on everyone's nerves. The humidity hung in the air like the punchline to a bad joke no one wanted to hear. But, as Captain Varric always said, a bad joke is better than no joke. Della was back at her console, poking at it like it had personally insulted her mother. Tucker, ever the comedian, leaned against a wall that looked like it might crumble if you whispered too harshly at it. Greg was staring off into space, probably dreaming about the good old days when space travel didn't involve potential death traps and hostile aliens with a flair for theatrics. "Can't believe we're still alive," Tucker muttered, breaking the silence. "Thought for sure we'd be alien chow by now." Della snorted. "Give it time. They're probably just waiting for us to get a tad more tender." Varric leaned against a console that looked like it belonged in a sci-fi museum's charity auction. "I'd prefer they wait a little longer. I'm not quite ready to be saudied." Greg finally spoke up. "What do you think they want with us anyway, aside from the obvious mischief and mayhem?" Varric shrugged, a motion that felt all too familiar. For all we know, we're just a side project. Maybe they get their kicks watching us flail around like headless chickens. Well, at least we're good at something, Della said, fingers a blur on the console. I'm pretty sure I'm close to deciphering this thing, but it's like trying to read Shakespeare after a concussion. Shakespeare's overrated anyway, Tucker said, kicking at the dusty floor. All those words just to say I'm sad or I love you. Hey, leave the bard out of it, Greg warned. He's got enough problems being dead and all. Their banter was interrupted by a low rumble that shook the corridor, dust raining from the ceiling like some apocalyptic confetti. What now? Varric growled, his patience wearing thin. Della swiped at her console, eyes scanning the nonsense alien script. Looks like our friends are trying to tighten the screws. Containment fields are shifting, and I'm pretty sure they are rerouting power. Whatever they are planning, it's probably not a surprise party. Unless the surprise is a big zap, Tucker offered cheerily. Surprise, Greg mimed, splaying his fingers like he was setting off fireworks. You're dead, the ground shook again, this time more forcefully, and Varric grabbed the wall to steady himself. We need a plan B, and fast. If we even had a plan A, Della muttered, but her fingers didn't stop moving. Plan A was survive, Varric reminded her, and look at us go. Can't say we're not dedicated, Greg said, glancing around at the grimy walls. What's next? Do we try to make a run for it? Running sounds good, Tucker said. As long as we're not running towards something worse. With our luck, it'd be straight into a V-shall barbecue, Varric said, raising an eyebrow. Maybe we can use that thing Della's been working on. Assuming I can crack it in time, Della replied, her face a mask of concentration. Give me 5 minutes. 5 minutes is a luxury around here, Varric said, glancing at his watch as if it would provide some cosmic insight. Spoiler, it didn't. The walls seemed to whisper secrets, or maybe it was just the creaking of old metal. Either way, it wasn't comforting. Varric hated secrets, mostly because they usually involved something trying to kill him. The tension in the room was thicker than Tucker's skull, but that was saying something. Varric looked at his crew, their resolve as fragile as their current predicament. Remember, this is our darkest hour, he said with a smirk. We might as well enjoy the ambience. Nothing like a little ambient dread to spice up the day, Tucker quipped. Greg raised an imaginary glass. To impending doom and the art of not giving a damn. Cheers, Varric agreed, imagining the finest blend of alien liquor his mind could muster. Della's fingers paused for a moment, just long enough to twist her lips into a satisfied smirk. I think I got it. I've got a way to mess with their power grid. It won't last long, but it might be enough to give us a window. A window's all we need, Varric said. Then we'll jump through it, kick and scream our way to freedom, or something like it. You make it sound so glamorous, Della observed dryly. Always knew I'd make a great travel agent, Varric replied. Now, let's make that window before they decide to seal it shut. With a shared nod, Della activated the sequence she'd painstakingly cobbled together. The lights flickered, the hum of the V-shall tech spiked, and the whole place seemed to tremble with uncertainty. Let's move, Varric barked, the urgency in his voice slicing through the tension like a well-honed blade. They bolted down the corridor, the path illuminated by the wavering lights of a failing system. Varric led the way, each step echoing like a drumbeat in an empty cathedral. The air was thick, charged with potential disaster. It's like running through a haunted house, Tucker panted, trying to keep up with Varric's determined pace. Minus the candy at the end, Greg added. Unless you count the candy as remaining alive, Varric shot back. They reached the junction, the one Varric hoped led to something other than a dead end. The map Della had pulled from the alien network was sketchy at best, but it was all they had to go on. Right or left? Della asked as they skidded to a halt. Varric hesitated for the briefest moment. Right, he decided, though there was no particular logic to it. Sometimes choices were as random as the universe itself. Right it is, Greg agreed, as if he were confirming a dinner order. They dashed down the corridor, the lights above them sparking and popping like a 4th of July gone horribly wrong. In the distance, the sound of something large and mechanical grinding to life set Varric's teeth on edge. "Sounds like they're getting serious," Tucker remarked. "Or they're giving us a soundtrack," Greg said. "I prefer classical, but I'll take whatever at this point." The corridor twisted and turned, each corner a potential trap. Varric felt the weight of every decision, every step that might lead them into the jaws of the beast. But he also felt the thrill of defiance, the rebel spirit that refused to be caged. "Why do I get the feeling they're hurting us?" Della asked, her voice tinged with wary sarcasm. "Because they probably are," Varric said. "But let's not make it easy for them." The lights dimmed further, the facility groaning like a creature on the brink of collapse. Varric's heart raced, adrenaline pumping through his veins like rocket fuel. The exit, if there was one, had to be nearby. "There!" Greg shouted, pointing to a door at the end of the passage. It looked sturdier than the ones they'd encountered so far, but also more promising. "Looks like it might lead out," Tucker said, though his optimism was as flimsy as a paper suit in a rainstorm. "Only one way to find out," Varric said. They reached the door, breathless and on edge. Della immediately got to work on the panel, her focus as sharp as a knife's edge. "Give me a sec," she said, fingers dancing over the alien symbols. Greg leaned against the wall, catching his breath. "We should get frequent flyer miles for this kind of thing. If we survive, I'm cashing in," Tucker replied. "Drinks on you, then," Varric said, watching as Della finally bypassed the lock. The door slid open with a reluctant hiss. Beyond was a vast chamber, one that seemed to stretch into infinity. The air was different here, almost breathable, and Varric's gut told him they were close to some kind of exit. "This looks promising," Della said, a note of hope creeping into her voice. "I'll take promising over certain death any day," Greg agreed. Varric stepped forward, the rest of the team following suit. The room was filled with strange machinery, the purpose of which was anyone's guess. But at the far end something glimmered, a beacon of potential salvation. "That's got to be the way out," Varric said. "Come on." They moved with renewed purpose, the machines looming like silent sentinels. But before they could reach the other side, a familiar hum filled the air, a sound that made Varric's skin crawl. The VSHAL were back online. "We've got company," Tucker warned, eyes scanning the shadows. "Figures they'd want to crash the party," Greg muttered. Della hurriedly tapped into her data pad, trying to keep their systems in disarray. "I'll do what I can to keep them at bay." "Every second counts," Varric said, pushing on. "We just need to get through that door." His team rallied, determination etched into their features. The end was in sight, but so too was the danger. Varric could feel the VSHAL tightening their grip, the walls closing in with malevolent intent. "Run like your life depends on it," Varric shouted, and they sprinted toward the sliver of light that beckoned them. As they reached the exit, Varric sent up a silent prayer to whatever cosmic force might be listening. They weren't out of the woods yet, but they were damn close. And if the VSHAL thought they'd won, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The air was ripe with tension and that peculiar tang of desperate hope, like a gambler on his last chip. Varric's boots pounded against the metallic floor in syncopated rhythm with the rest of the team, the echo of their combined footfalls a grim symphony of survival. "I swear," Varric muttered between breaths, "if we make it out of this, I'm charging an extra arm and a leg for this kind of tour." "You'd need a freaking octopus to pay for that," Tucker called back, his usual levity barely masking the tremor in his voice. "Or maybe a VSHAL. Those bastards have arms for days." "I hear they're not big tippers," Greg added, side-eyeing the encroaching shadows like they might slither in closer if they felt ignored. Varric skidded to a halt as they reached the next door. It looked just as unwelcoming and foreboding as the myriad others they'd encountered, but beggars couldn't be choosers, and they were practically handing out tin cups. "Della, do your thing." Della stepped up, her fingers already dancing across the alien control panel like she was playing an instrument only she understood. "All right, let's see what kind of alien rock concert this door wants to play." While she worked, Varric glanced around. The machinery surrounding them hummed with the indifferent energy of something far too advanced for their understanding. It all looked vaguely threatening, like an alien IKEA display, and he half expected a flat-pack assembly manual to pop out of the wall at any moment. "Any chance you can speed that up?" Varric asked, watching Della like she was the star performer in a last-ditch talent show. "A little appreciation for the arts, please," she retorted, not pausing in her work. "It's hard to appreciate anything when we've got a Death March playlist on loop," Greg noted, casting a wary glance down the corridor they'd just fled. "Let the artist finish her masterpiece," Tucker said, leaning against the wall with a casualness that belied the tension coiling in the air. "Besides, aliens probably don't appreciate impatience. Aliens probably don't appreciate humans," Varric said. "But here we are, ruining their day." Della finally managed to coax the door open with a hiss that sounded suspiciously like an annoyed sigh. Beyond lay a control room, full of flashing lights and alien displays. It was like standing on the bridge of a starship, or maybe a particularly ambitious nightclub. "Well, either we're about to meet the DJ or this is where they park the spaceship," Tucker quipped, peering inside. "All right, folks," Varric said, trying to inject a semblance of confidence into his voice. "Let's find out just how screwed we are." The team shuffled inside, eyes darting around as if expecting a surprise alien karaoke session to break out. The room had an eerie stillness, a pause before the chaos, and Varric could almost hear the universe holding its breath. Della moved to the central console, her gaze scanning the alien readouts. "Okay, here's the deal. This room controls a lot of the key systems for the facility. If we play our cards right, we might just be able to turn the tables." "Turn the tables?" Greg asked, eyebrows raised. "That sounds suspiciously close to having a plan." "Desperate times," Varric said with a shrug. "And besides, it's more like a half-baked idea with some loose napkin sketches." "Still better than nothing," Tucker noted. "Even if it feels like we're trying to outthink a supercomputer with a calculator." As Della worked, Varric turned to the rest of the team. "Right, listen up. We're gonna try something crazy. These V-Shall love their tech, but what if, just what if, it has a backdoor?" The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge. The V-Shall were known for their seemingly impregnable technology, sleek and inscrutable. But if there was one thing humanity excelled at, it was finding a way to mess with things they didn't understand. Greg scratched his chin. "So, you're saying we hack the hackers?" "I like to think of it more as artistic reimagining," Varric replied, a twinkle in his eye that spoke of mischief and madness in equal measure. "We'll need to disable their systems just long enough to create a distraction. That should buy us the chance to escape. Seems like we're banking on the element of surprise," Della said, focused on the console, "and possibly a miracle." "I've always been a fan of surprises," Tucker said, "especially when we're the ones giving them." "Then let's give the V-Shall a real showstopper," Varric said. "Della, you think you can work your magic?" Della smirked. "They won't know what hit them. I've been tinkering with their power grid, and if I can overload it, we might just be able to plunge this place into chaos." "And chaos is our best friend," Greg added, as though it were a celebrated family member. Varric turned to face the team, their expressions a mix of determination and that particular brand of insanity that only came from too many brushes with death. "All right, let's make some noise. Della, get started. The rest of you, keep an eye out for any uninvited guests." Greg and Tucker took up positions by the entrance, their nerves as taut as a wire. The hum of the room's machinery seemed to grow quieter, as if it were giving them the space for one last dramatic monologue. "Any requests for our escape theme song?" Tucker asked, his eyes scanning the room for threats. "Something with a good beat," Greg suggested. "Maybe Live and Let Die." "Too on the nose," Varric said. "How about We Will Rock You? Seems fitting." As Della worked, the room's lights flickered ominously. Varric could feel the tension ratcheting up another notch, the stakes higher than they'd ever been. The V-Shall had them surrounded, but Varric had always believed in the power of human stubbornness. "You know," Tucker said, with a grin that was more bravado than humor, I always thought we'd go out like this, in a blaze of glory, making life difficult for some poor extraterrestrial bum. Wouldn't have it any other way, Greg said, his voice steady despite the impending peril. The room vibrated with a dangerous energy, and Varric looked to Della, who was furiously tapping commands into the console. Almost there, she said, sweat beading on her brow like tiny diamonds of stress. Make it count, Varric said, feeling the weight of his words in the air. Just then the room's lights dimmed, and the machinery let out a low whine like an animal on its last legs. Della looked up, triumph seeping into her grin. Got it, powers fluctuating. They'll think it's a malfunction. And while they're busy scratching their heads, Varric added, we slip out the back. Subtle, Tucker said. I like it. The team gathered by the door, the exit a beacon of potential freedom. Varric felt the familiar churn of adrenaline, that mix of fear and exhilaration that told him they were on the edge of something big. Remember, stick together, Varric said. We've come this far, let's not screw it up now. You're the boss, Greg said, giving a mock salute. More like a glorified babysitter, Varric replied, but there was a warmth in his voice that belied the harshness of their situation. With a final glance at Della, Varric gestured for them to move. The door slid open with a reluctant hiss, revealing the corridor beyond. It was quieter than before, the sounds of the facility muted by the disruption they'd caused. All around them the shadows danced, as if the building itself was aware of their presence. They moved as one, a ragtag band of misfits against the universe, and Varric couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. They might be outgunned and outmatched, but they weren't out of options. Not yet. Keep your eyes peeled, Varric said, his voice low. And remember, if you see anything that looks like an alien welcoming committee, it's probably not. Words to live by, Tucker murmured, his eyes flicking back and forth as they moved. The facility seemed to close in around them, the walls whispering secrets they could never understand. But the team forged ahead, driven by the promise of escape and the sheer doggedness that had got them this far. As they reached another junction, Varric paused. Della, how's it looking? Della glanced at her data pad. We're still good. The system's thinking it's just a glitch, but we need to keep moving. They won't stay distracted forever. Let's hope our luck holds, Greg said, his voice a steady anchor in the chaos. They took a left, the corridor stretching out before them like a challenge. Varric led the way, his steps sure and steady despite the pounding of his heart. They were close, he could feel it. A few more turns, a few more chances, and they might just make it out. Feels like we're being funneled, Della said, her voice carrying a note of tension. Probably are, Varric replied. But we're stubborn bastards and we're not going down easy. They pressed on, the facility's design a cruel maze meant to confound and capture. But Varric had always been good at puzzles, especially when the stakes were high. Their path took them through another control room, smaller but no less intimidating. The lights flickered, and Varric caught a glimpse of motion out of the corner of his eye. Contact, Greg called, raising his weapon. They tensed, preparing for a fight, but it was only a shadow, a trick of the light. Varric let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Damn place is playing tricks on us. Or we're just jumping at shadows, Tucker said, though he didn't lower his guard. Either way, we need to keep moving, Della urged. They pushed through the room, the flickering lights casting strange shapes on the walls. It was like stepping through a nightmare, but they moved with purpose, driven by the need to escape. Finally, they reached what Varric hoped was a final door. It loomed large and imposing, but there was a promise of open space beyond. All right, this is it, Varric said, taking a breath. Let's make it count. You mean we didn't die for nothing? Tucker asked, a half-hearted grin on his lips. Not today, Varric replied. Let's get the hell out of here. Della worked the door, the rest of the team watching the corridor behind them. With a final hiss, the door opened, revealing a pathway that led, blessedly, toward daylight, or whatever approximation the Vishal facility used. This is it, Della said, her eyes wide with the realization that they might just pull this off. Varric took the first step, then another, and soon they were all moving, propelled by adrenaline and the taste of freedom on the tip of their tongues. The path took them through more corridors, each one a test of their resolve. But they pressed on, hearts in their throats, until they burst through the final door and into the open air. It was a sight that could have brought tears to their eyes if they weren't too busy breathing it in. The sky stretched above them, a vast expanse of possibility, and Varric felt the weight lift from his shoulders. "Never thought I'd be so happy to see empty space," Greg said, his voice tinged with wonder. "Don't get too comfortable," Della warned, but there was a lightness in her tone, a hint of victory. Varric turned to face his team, their faces reflecting the same mix of disbelief and triumph. "We did it. We sure as hell did," Tucker said, clapping Varric on the back. They stood there for a moment, savoring the success, knowing it was far from over but relishing the win all the same. They still had a long way to go, but they'd proven something here today, that humanity might be down but it was never out. And as they looked to the sky, Varric knew they were ready for whatever came next. The corridor stretched out like a bad morning after, a relentless, unforgiving path that reeked of stale air and questionable decisions. Varric led the charge, heart pounding in his chest like it was trying to write its own escape route. Behind him, his team followed, each step a calculated gamble against the odds. "Anyone else feel like we're in some kind of cosmic maze designed by a sadistic architect with a grudge against humanity?" Tucker quipped, his voice echoing off the metallic walls. "Could be worse," Greg replied. "At least we haven't run into anything with more limbs than us." "Yet," Della added, her fingers a blur over her data pad. "Don't jinx it." The air was thick with tension and the faint whiff of burnt circuits, a scent Varric had come to associate with Della's handiwork. They needed to keep moving. The Vishal wouldn't be scratching their scaly heads for long, and Varric had no intention of being a footnote in some alien's victory log. "All right, team," Varric called, his voice steady despite the chaos. Time to crash their party. They reached another control room, this one humming with that peculiar energy only alien tech could produce. Silver constructs lined the walls, their sleek surfaces reflecting the team like warped funhouse mirrors. Varric had never trusted a thing that hummed, especially not when it seemed to judge his entire existence. Della took to the main console, her expression one of grim determination. "If I can overload their primary systems, it'll give us the edge to push them back. But it's going to get messy." "Messy is literally my middle name," Tucker said, grinning like a man who'd accepted his fate was to cause more chaos than he solved. "Then let's make a masterpiece," Varric said with a nod. "Della, you're up." The room crackled with electricity as Della's fingers danced over the alien control panel. It was a symphony of chaos, each keystroke a note in their defiant anthem. Varric watched, a cocktail of pride and terror settling in his gut. She was good, but they were up against the Vishal, a species that made paranoia an art form. As the system started to overload, the lights flickered and alarms blared, a siren song announcing their intentions to the universe. "That's our cue," Varric said, motioning for the others to get ready. "Let's send these bastards packing." Just then, the door behind them slid open, revealing a squad of Vishal warriors with all the charm of a tax audit. They moved with that confident swagger of a species that believed they owned the place, probably because they did. "Look who showed up for the encore," Tucker said, leveling his weapon. "Let's give him a performance they'll never forget." The first shots rang out, a cacophony of gunfire and alien screeches that echoed through the corridors. Greg and Tucker laid down cover fire, their aim as true as desperation allowed, while Varric and Della focused on keeping the Vishal's attention divided. Varric's eyes flicked to Lura, their Vishal ally who had been uncharacteristically quiet. She stood apart, eyes narrowed as if calculating which side would benefit her the most. Varric never trusted anyone who appeared to have all the answers, but for now, she was as close to an ally as they could hope. "You gonna help or just critique our technique?" Varric shouted over the din. Lura smirked, her expression as patronizing as it was inscrutable. "I thought you'd never ask. With a flick of her wrist, she activated a device on her arm, and the Vishal squad hesitated, confusion rippling through their ranks like a virus. For a moment, Varric entertained the wild idea that she might actually be worth her weight in whatever Vishal used for currency. "Well, that was convenient," Greg muttered, taking advantage of the pause to adjust his aim. "We're not out of the woods yet," Della interjected, her concentration split between the console and the chaos. "They'll adapt and fast." "Then we'll just have to keep adapting faster," Varric said, pulling the trigger until his weapon's charge indicated it needed a breather. The team fought with a desperation born of too many near misses, every second a precious commodity in their bid for survival. The Vishal might have had the advantage of numbers and technology, but Varric's crew had something else, the tenacity of those who refused to play by the rules. The room was a mess of sparks and smoke, the air thick with the metallic tang of burnt circuits. Varric could feel the heat on his skin, a reminder that they were playing with fire. But then, that was where they thrived, in the spaces between sanity and survival. "Della, how much longer?" Varric yelled, glancing at the door as more Vishal reinforcements poured in. "Almost there," she shouted back, her tone a mix of excitement and urgency. "Just need to bypass one more." The console erupted in a shower of sparks, and Della was thrown back, landing hard against the wall. For a moment, Varric's heart stopped, the world narrowing to the sight of her motionless form. "Della," he shouted, rushing to her side. Tucker and Greg covered him, their fire focused and relentless, while Lura continued to sow discord among the Vishal ranks. Della groaned, her eyes fluttering open as Varric helped her up. "I'm okay," she said, though her voice was shaky. "But I think I just pissed off the entire facility." "Join the club," Varric said, a grin tugging at the corners of his mouth despite the chaos. "Come on, we need to move." The team regrouped, their resolve renewed in the face of adversity. They fought their way through the facility, every step a battle against the odds, every victory a testament to their stubbornness. Varric led them toward their final objective, a control room that towered over the facility like a throne of alien ingenuity. It was their best chance to push the Vishal back and secure their freedom. "Last stop," Varric announced, motioning for them to take positions. "Let's make it count." Tucker and Greg took up defensive stances, their weapons ready for the inevitable onslaught. Della, shaken but determined, returned to the console, her fingers moving with renewed purpose. Lura stood by, her presence a reminder that even in the darkest moments, alliances could be forged. The Vishal came at them in waves, each assault a test of their endurance. But Varric's team held firm, their spirits unyielding in the face of overwhelming odds. As Della worked, the facility began to tremble, the lights flickering like a dying star. The power fluctuated wildly, a symphony of chaos that spoke of systems pushed to their breaking point. "That's it," Della shouted over the noise. "I've got control," Varric nodded, his focus unwavering. "Do it. Let's show them what happens when you mess with humans." With a final keystroke, Della activated the override and the facility's systems went dark. The hum of alien technology fell silent, leaving only the echo of their victory. For a moment, the Vishal hesitated, uncertainty rippling through their ranks. It was all the opening Varric needed. "Now," he shouted, leading the charge. They pushed forward, driving the Vishal back with a ferocity born of desperation. The aliens retreated, their confidence shattered by the unexpected turn of events. Varric's team fought on, their determination a beacon in the darkness, until the last of the Vishal had fled, leaving the facility eerily silent. The battle won, Varric took a moment to catch his breath, the weight of their victory settling in. "Well, that was fun," Tucker said, his voice tinged with exhaustion and relief. "Define fun," Greg replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "Surviving," Varric interjected, a grin breaking through the weariness. "I'd call that a win." Della joined them, her expression a mix of triumph and disbelief. "I can't believe we pulled it off." "Believe it," Lura said, her tone as inscrutable as ever. "You've earned it." Together they surveyed the damage, the silence a testament to their success. The facility was theirs, and with it their freedom. Varric glanced at his team, their faces a reflection of the struggle and the victory they shared. They were bruised, battered, and exhausted, but they were alive. And in the end, that was all that mattered. "All right, folks," Varric said, clapping his hands together. "Let's get the hell out of here before they change their minds." As they made their way out, the sky above promised new challenges, but for now, Varric's team savored the moment, knowing that they'd beaten the odds once again. And with that, they stepped into the light, ready for whatever came next. Varric stood at the center of the control room, his gaze slowly sweeping over the devastation they'd wrought. The place looked like the aftermath of a robot rampage, with sparks flickering and the occasional puff of smoke curling from fried circuits. It was the kind of chaos that felt right at home with his crew, a fitting portrait of their handiwork. "Well," Varric declared, "I think we've really made this place ours." Nothing says ownership like wrecking the joint. Della, still dusting herself off from her earlier encounter with the explosive console, managed a wry grin. "We really know how to leave a lasting impression, don't we? Especially on the local infrastructure," Tucker chimed in, leaning against a half-melted panel. "I'm sure the VShal will appreciate our artistic contributions." Greg surveyed the room with a critical eye, his usual air of caution tinged with disbelief. "Can't believe we're still standing. Figured we'd be decorating a VShal trophy case by now." "Well," Lura interjected, her voice smooth and unruffled, "you humans have a certain stubbornness, like cockroaches." Tucker chuckled, nudging Varric with his elbow. "Hey, did we just get compared to cockroaches by an alien? I think that's a compliment." "Coming from her, it probably is," Varric replied, turning his attention back to the task at hand. "All right, folks, enough standing around. We've got a facility to rebuild. Let's get to it." The mood shifted as they set about transforming the decimated alien installation into something more welcoming, well, as welcoming as a fortress could get. The plan was simple: reinforce the place, slap a metaphorical humans-only sign on the front door, and make sure the VShal thought twice before trying to reclaim it. As they worked, Varric couldn't help but reflect on what they'd accomplished. Sure, they'd just thrown a wrench into the VShal's well-oiled machine, but what next? This place might be theirs for now, but the galaxy had a way of keeping things interesting, dangerous and unpredictable. "You know," Varric said, watching Della cobble together a makeshift defense grid from the remnants of alien tech, "I never thought we'd actually make it this far." "Neither did I," she admitted, her fingers deftly working the alien control panel. "But here we are, defying the odds and all that jazz." Greg snorted, his hands busy repairing what little remained of the facility's communication array. "What's the plan, Captain?" "Turn this joint into the galaxy's newest human hangout. Or maybe a tourist trap," Tucker suggested. "Come for the rebel spirit, stay for the atmosphere that might kill you." Varric chuckled. "No, I think this place has potential as a fortress. We'll need somewhere to regroup, somewhere to show the galaxy that we're not just a bunch of renegades running from one disaster to another." "Sounds ambitious," Lura said, her tone carrying a hint of approval. "And possibly suicidal." "That's us," Varric replied with a shrug. "Ambitiously suicidal." As the hours slipped by, the team fell into an easy rhythm, each member focusing on their strengths to turn the facility into a fortress worthy of their defiant stand. The air was filled with the clatter of tools, the hum of alien tech begrudgingly bent to human will, and the occasional sardonic remark. "You know," Tucker mused as he adjusted a defensive turret to point somewhere useful, "if we keep this up, we might just give humans a reputation for being impossible to kill." "We've already got a reputation for being stubborn," Della pointed out. "Might as well add indestructible to the list." Greg glanced at Varric, his expression a mix of curiosity and skepticism. "You really think we can hold this place?" Varric paused, considering the question carefully. "Holding it isn't the challenge, Greg. It's making the galaxy realize that we're not just clinging on by our fingernails. We're here to stay, and we're damn well going to make sure everyone knows it." The work continued, and with each passing minute the facility began to resemble something more than a battlefield. It was a testament to human resilience, a fortress forged in the fires of adversity, a place where they could regroup, gather their strength, and plan their next move. As the weary crew took a brief respite, Varric found himself at one of the facility's observation ports, staring out at the stars that stretched endlessly into the void. The universe was vast, indifferent, and downright hostile more often than not. But for all its dangers, it was their home. Planning our next great adventure, Lura's voice broke the silence, her presence as enigmatic as ever. More like planning how not to die horribly in our sleep, Varric replied, his tone light but his mind weighed down with the enormity of their situation. The Vishal will not leave this insult unanswered, she warned, her gaze steady as she joined him at the viewport. Good, Varric said with a grin. We wouldn't want them getting bored. Lura chuckled softly, a rare sound that hinted at the layers beneath her alien exterior. You are a curious species, reckless, audacious, and yet, you endure. That's humans for you, Varric said. We might not be the best at following rules, but we're damn good at surviving. The two stood in companionable silence, the stars casting their cold light over the facility. It wasn't perfect, hell, it wasn't even close, but it was theirs. And for now, that was enough. As the crew gathered for a well-earned break, the facility hummed with a new energy, the kind born of defiance and hope, of resilience and determination. They'd carved out a corner of the galaxy to call their own, and while the future was as uncertain as ever, Varric knew one thing for sure: they wouldn't face it alone. To the best damn team in the galaxy, Varric announced, raising an imaginary glass. Here's to whatever comes next. The others raised their invisible drinks, laughter and camaraderie filling the air. They were a motley crew, a strange mix of personalities and backgrounds, but together they were more than the sum of their parts. Della leaned back, her expression one of satisfaction mixed with a touch of exhaustion. So, Captain, what's the plan for tomorrow? Varric considered the question for a moment before replying. We live to see it. Everything else is just a bonus. Tucker clapped Varric on the shoulder, his grin as infectious as ever. Now that's my kind of plan. As the laughter died down and the quiet of the facility settled in, Varric felt a sense of peace wash over him. They'd fought, they'd bled, and they'd won their freedom, if only for a moment. But in that moment, they'd found something worth fighting for, a future they could shape with their own hands. And as the stars watched silently from above, Varric knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they'd face them head-on, with the kind of reckless courage that came from knowing they had nothing left to lose. For now, though, they'd enjoy the calm after the storm, savor the sweetness of victory, and prepare for whatever the galaxy decided to throw their way next. Because if there was one thing Varric had learned, it was that the universe never lacked for surprises. But that was okay. They'd managed to surprise the universe right back. All right, team, Varric said, his voice carrying the weight of both command and camaraderie. Let's get some rest. Tomorrow's another day, and who knows? We might just make it through that one, too. With that, the crew dispersed, each finding a corner of the fortress to call their own. As Varric settled in, he felt a sense of belonging, a rare and precious feeling in a universe that seemed determined to strip it away at every turn. But here, in this moment, they were together. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The stars continued their endless dance outside, indifferent and eternal, but for Varric and his crew, they were a reminder of the vastness of the adventure that lay ahead. And whatever it brought, they'd be ready. Because in the end, they were human, and that made all the difference.